Your Excellency Minister Kasčiūnas, Excellencies Ambassadors, officers, distinguished guests, colleagues of mine. Welcome to the third annual Lithuanian-Dutch Foreign Affairs and Security Conference. I'm Linas Kojala, Director of Eastern Europe Studies Center, and it's a great privilege for me and my team to host this important event. I'd like to start off quickly with a historic reference. In 1613, so early 17th century, a map of Grand Duchy of Lithuania was published and printed by William Blau, a famous cartographer in the Netherlands. He's one of the famous masters of this particular art. Vilnius University, the host of today's event, actually still owns a globe made by Blau in 1622. I think it proves that Lithuania and the Netherlands have a very long intellectual, cultural tradition of linkage and cooperation. But nowadays it extends to many more fields than ever before. The tragic geopolitical circumstances, Russia's brutal war of aggression against Ukraine, certainly changed Europe, but it also encouraged Lithuania and other partners in NATO and EU to cooperate more and to make things that were previously seemed unrealistic to implement. So this conference is a testament to the partnership of Lithuania and the Netherlands. And we're certainly very grateful for the Netherlands for playing an essential role in NATO's eastern flank by stationing troops as a part of NATO's enhanced forward presence. And recently we've heard Dutch Minister of Defense saying that this mission will be continued at least until 2026, and hopefully indefinitely, because even if circumstances change for the better, even if Ukraine succeeds, as we all hope it's going to happen, we will still need to be strong and persistent in making sure we are safe and Ukraine has all the capabilities needed to ensure deterrence as well. So I'd like to express my sincere gratitude and appreciation to Ambassador Jack Twiss and his team and the Dutch Minister of Foreign Affairs, which was essential and a partner in cooperating on this particular event and on many other things that we did together and will hopefully do in the future as well. We are proud partners of yours and hopefully we can make things in the future as well. And just a final thought, a very quick quote. You need to look, you need to think, you need to move, you need to find space, you need to help others. It's very, very simple in the end, like in football, as in life. A famous philosopher, also known as a football player, Johan Cruyff, said this. And I think this particular quote, even though obviously linked to the sporting fields, is certainly attributable and implementable in foreign affairs and security policy. So that's my wish to everyone here, and I hope we'll have very important and interesting conversations. And now I would like to invite Ambassador Jack Twiss for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Linas, for these kind words, and also very nice that you referred to the library and the Blau cartographer. And it was very nice that when the Prime Minister recently visited the library, and that was actually as a kind of an interlude, because afterwards he had to go back to the President. We had difficulties to get him out of the library because there were so many documents that were linking the Netherlands to Lithuania, and one is actually that the oldest degree of a Lithuanian medical doctor comes from Leiden University and was signed by Professor Boerhaave, and that's just here down, 2 stairs down, to be seen in the library. Wonderful. Thank you so much, all of you coming here. It's already the 3rd edition of the Lithuanian-Netherlands Security and Foreign Affairs Conference. You can 3 times is a tradition, I would say. So let's say, and also looking to our colleagues from Klingendaal who are here, that are an essential partner in the Netherlands, because we do it 1 year in Lithuania, and last year, for instance, it was in Klingendaal, in The Hague, although it is debated because Klingendaal is officially in Wassenaar. But nevertheless, that's local politics. Why are the Netherlands and Lithuania so close to each other? I think that is important to underline. It's not just because we both love the rain, as we can see that today, and the name of the country even comes from rain, and we also grew up in rain in the Netherlands, but it's specifically because we're societies that are based on the same values. And these are democracy, it's human rights, it's rule of law, it's stability, and it is seeking common prosperity for its populations and for the neighboring countries. Well, not all the neighboring countries, I would say, in this particular case, but that has more to do with the neighboring country here. But this created a rock-solid foundation that since re-independence of Lithuania in 1990 has gone from strength to strength. It shows itself through its defense cooperation, that is obviously in the framework of NATO, but it is already before the entrance to NATO. It started already with the bilateral military cooperation, which continues today. We train together, we exercise together, and what I really would like to underline is that we learn from each other both ways. And that is an extremely important thing. I can't go into massive details, but also our special forces work closely together, and the feedback that I'm getting from both sides is of tremendous enthusiasm, and that the learning curve is steep and it works. But it's called Security and Foreign Affairs Conference, as they also call it the diplomatic foreign affairs side to it. And there you see that in the international arena, both countries are pulling on the same side of the rope, so to say. Whether it is in searching for regional stability, whether it is again international prosperity. Once we were part of the frugal 7 or whatever what it was, but we also like to spend money wisely. And so in many fields we work extremely closely. But there's one thing that I really would like to stress, and that is the important thing, and that's why we are also here together, and that's why it's important to do this on an annual basis and bring the two countries together and bring people from media, academia, military, diplomats, and especially also the next generation, the students together, is that we as nations, we look from a different perspective because of our different histories to certain conflicts. We find each other in many ways, definitively as the professionals, but it is not necessarily true that our whole of society finds each other automatically, and that is work for us. I mean, it's good to share things in our bubble, but let's face it, there is not a common narrative within the European Union, within NATO, among the member states on the history post-1945. That is a thing that despite 2008, despite 2014, despite 2022, that is a thing that needs work and continuous work. It is never finished. And without that, we are as societies, and I'm talking then about we as the Dutch in this case, not as Lithuanian-Dutch, we are vulnerable for disinformation campaigns from the Russian actor. And as I said, because of the this fortunate geopolitical situation, we have obviously at this particular moment grown as societies closer. We in the Netherlands since the 17th of July 2014, we had a very rude wake-up call with the MH17 that affected every Dutch family, and it is amazing to see that in a country by then of 16 million people, that everyone knew someone or had either played tennis with them or went to the same school. It really had an impact on society, but to keep that not just alive, but also to turn that into actionable deeds and what it means. So that is the main challenge I would like to give to all of you here. I'm proud that we are part of this. I'm very glad that EESC is our partner, and Klingendahl, as I mentioned already. I'm tremendously honored to stand here in university, and I'm going to say it quietly. It was originally a Jesuit university, which is close to my heart. That's also my background. I think that jointly within EU and definitely within NATO, we are ever closer partners, and we, in many ways, we lead the way within the alliance in the intellectual debate, and we're jointly bouncing, as they call it, above our weight. With that, I would like to give the floor back to Linus, who is hiding behind a pillar. He's always very good. He has maybe a similar background than I have. I was also hiding behind the pillars in my last job. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Ambassador. It's always a great fun to be with you. And also, obviously, thanks to our partners at Klingeldal. I know that a lot of Lithuanian diplomats, immediately after restoration of Lithuania's independence, had opportunities to learn from our colleagues in the Netherlands, and I'm happy that we as a think tank now continue our collaboration, a bit of different fields, but still seeking the same goals and defending the same principles. So thanks a lot for that as well. Now I'd like to invite Minister of National Defense of Lithuania, Laurynas Kasčiūnas, for his opening speech. But before he gets here on the floor, I would like to mention a fun fact about him, because prior to becoming a member of parliament and Minister of Defense, Laurynas was a think tanker, and actually he was in my current position as CEO of Eastern Europe Studies Center. So he's not only a politician, but also a think tanker. So one of us, please, the Minister.
Dear Linas, thank you for the introduction, and you just forget to say what I invited you to the job in the Eastern Europe Studies Center. And it's the reason why you are director of the center. Okay, I'm joking. So, Your Excellency, ambassadors, diplomats, defense attaché, all friends, I think our bilateral relations, I would call it excellent. I'm in position of 3 months. Next week will be 3 months. And I met Minister Ollongren 4 times. She visited Lithuania, we met in EU ministers meeting, we met in NATO, and we met in Singapore in Shangri-La conference. My big recommendation to every minister to go to this conference. You can feel the Indo-Pacific, but at the same you can meet so many important ministers of defense of Europe. Sometimes you cannot meet them in EU meetings, so Shangri-La is very, very useful format. Why it's excellent? When minister came and she just, she said and confirmed the decision to deploy the Patriot system for trainings here in Lithuania in summer. We are trying to make it break through in our defense rotational model. Not so easy because of different reasons, but thank you for that, Netherlands. Thank you for that. The history, EFP, together with Germany, Netherlands, all the time. And now you decided to prolong it till 26, and to, of course, after the decision, our decision to move with Germany for full brigade here in Vilnius, we hope we will decide to somehow to integrate in this new defense deterrence architecture. And I know you have a history now in cooperation with Germany, like a formal, one brigade of Germans and battalion of Netherlands working together, interactive. So I think you should continue it in Lithuania. And I'm a football fan. I cannot use this football symbolics here too, because to have in one team Lothar Matthäus, Jürgen Klinsmann, Rudi Völler, with Ruud Gullit, Marco van Basten, Ronald Koeman, it's fantastic for us. It's fantastic. Okay, Ruud van Nistelrooy from our generation. So thank you for it, and we are very happy to have you here, and we are very looking forward for deepening the cooperation. Looking more broadly on our region, on eastern flank, so of course we are waiting now for Washington summit. We need to catch the progress on implementation of NATO defense plans, executability of NATO defense plans. We move forward to deterrence by denial, and it means more forces on the ground here to be ready to fight on the line. It's the biggest deterrence factor for our adversaries in the East. And I think we're on the same page here. Of course, we need to do a lot of things in the whole NATO, because some countries need, I would say, to dedicate more forces to these defense plans. We know there are gaps in different fields, like air defense. So we're trying to move also here and to feel some progress, and I know Netherlands will always support us. Support to Ukraine, another important factor and direction that we working together. We counted, if you want to counterweight Russians, which investing at least $1 billion euros per year into the war against Ukraine. You need to find the counterweight here, and of course our decision of Lithuanian decision to support Ukraine every year for 0.25 of GDP. It's countered by the understanding that if all NATO countries will do the same, we can counterbalance Russians. But Netherlands showing great examples here too, supporting Ukraine. Thank you also for that. And defense spending. I know you would now join the club of 2%. So I think in the Washington summit we will have 22 or 23 countries which already joined the club. So it's a good trend, but you know, it's incremental trend, because if you look what Russia doing, how they're investing, 9% of GDP, absolutely we need to do more. We are also, you know, now in the hot days trying to find solutions in the parliament for at least for the 3% next year. Last step tomorrow, we'll see how it works. Hope we'll succeed. At the same time, my obligation and promise that even this year we will reach 3%, because now it's 2.85. We need at least 120 million for that, and we will purchase another middle-range air defense system, short-range air defense system, and we will start some of the mechanizations projects of our division, Lithuanian division. I asked my military experts from a ministry to count one interesting number. Starting from our membership in NATO, 2004, I asked, could you count how much and what is the number of euros we underfinanced our military? It's a 2% as a benchmark, and you know, from 2004 to 2016-17, we had 0.8, 0.7, and 1.1, and so what kind of amount of money we underfinanced of our all defense sector? So it's 7.9 billions. 7.9 billions. This is the number. That's why, you know, we need to do much more than we are doing now, but we are trying, of course. So, and trying to give a view, and I think we will find some good ideas today for our bilateral cooperation, for our regional approach, and then I want to thank once again for our now close friendship, and let's move forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you for your speech and certainly employment opportunities as well. I would now like to invite our first guest from the Netherlands, because that's the core idea of the conference, to bring people from the Netherlands to Lithuania, and obviously to go there every second year for exchange of ideas and opinions. So, Rear Admiral Jeanette Morang, Director of Operations of the Netherlands Defense Staff. Please, ma'am.
Good afternoon, Your Excellency, ambassadors, and colleagues and guests. So what I see here in front of me are young people, more vintage people like myself. So I thought it would be a nice approach just to take you back in history a little bit, because I've now been in the Navy for 40 plus years, and I've seen the world change dramatically. So when I joined in 1983, it was actually, well, it was simple. You see, look to the east, that was where the enemy was. Everyone was focused on it. We had a very large army. We had a large fleet with more than 20 frigates. And you know what your threat looked like. But then in 1991, with the fall of the German Wall, and with, well, actually the threat going away with the Soviet Union falling apart, there was a huge decline in defense budgets, and every year it became less. And people, the society started, well, a bit addicted to easy life and not having to spend money on defense. And it was much more important to spend money on education, medical care, and consumption. So we grew smaller and smaller with the Navy and the Army, but no one cared. Because there was no enemy. And, well, in 2000, when Putin came to power in 2002, he did a speech where he actually blamed terrorism. He said, well, that is the direction you have to look in. But then, in the 2007 Munich Security Conference, he made clear what he was really made of. And he made clear to the United States that Russia was still a power to be reckoned with. The United States was overstepping her boundaries, and Russia would not stand for that. And well, people heard that speech, but of course, seeing them as a potential, well, contestant again, that was inconvenient. What that meant, that you had to invest in defense, and we'd rather invest in ourselves, medical care, education, the easy life. And then in 2008, there was a second wake-up call when the Russians invaded Georgia, claiming that they were protecting ethnic Russians that were maltreated in Georgia. And the international community was watching, but it didn't really do anything. Of course, Russia was condemned and it shouldn't do that, but there was no real action, and everyone went on doing the business as they did. But they did ignore the signs simply because the signs were very inconvenient. And then the next blow, February 2014. And it was not a real blow, it was creeping in. If you look into history, people couldn't even tell whether the annexation of Crimea, whether it was February or March. But it was little green men, and then where did they come from? Are they Russian? So at that point, I was actually in NATO. I worked in the international military staff, in the operations directorate, and I was working on planning a mission together with Russia, a NATO-Russia mission to have an escort for the motor vessel Cape Ray that was that came over from the US to do the destruction of chemical weapons that had been shipped from Syria. And well, it stopped from one day to the next because everyone was confused. There were a lot of talks, there were a lot of meetings of the North Atlantic Council, but there, of course, Russia was at a certain point condemned, but then there was a lot of debate of what actually should be done, what the next step should be, because for many of the nations it came unexpected, and again, it was very inconvenient because we had close ties with Russia, we had a NATO-Russia Council, there were energy ties with Russia that are very hard to break because it was easy fuel. So there was a movement, and in the NATO summit in Wales, there was a readiness action plan that has been executed over the years, but there was also a 2% pledge, and the nation said, so well, we now will start to spend 2% of our GDP on defense. But well, the ink of the declaration hadn't dried yet, and there were already heads of state saying, well, yes, it's a letter of intent and we will move forward. But in the end, they did not, because it was expensive and inconvenient. But they did have this readiness action plan in 2015 that was starting to execute, and one of the steps was enhanced forward presence. And that is when our multinational battle group under the German lead, but with a Dutch company in that, came to Lithuania. And well, Lithuania was grateful that we were here, and we were happy to be here because we did feel it our obligation to help. And there was enhanced air policing, so on a rotational basis, we send over X-16s to help support defend the airspace. There was the graduate response plans that were built, so there were a lot of steps taken, but the bottom line was there was not really additional money. And because we had already been reducing the military everywhere, that money was really needed to be able to make a large fist. But the multinational battle group was there at that point as a so-called tripwire. So if the Russians would do something in the border, it would affect more people than just one nation, because these multinational battle groups in all three Baltic states and Poland consisted of, well, almost all NATO member states. So that was a very good first step. But then the real wake-up call arrived on 20 February 2021, because that was really something that allies, well, they saw it coming, and at that point in time, I was again in NATO's service, in NATO's Maritime Command. I was a Deputy Chief of Staff Operations in charge of the standing naval forces. That's 2 groups of frigates and 2 groups of MCM vessels. So we had to start making plans. So if this happens, and those planning sequences already started in October, what are we going to do? So we start making plans to be more ready, more resilient, also plans on how to ensure the NATO allies that could potentially feel threatened, to support those. But we every day when we had been talking about this topic, we looked at each other and said, well, it wouldn't be beneficial for them. I mean, if they do that, it's not really an advantage. But then in the end, we did underestimate the fact that as Western countries, we don't really understand Russian calculus, and it's different from ours. They do things for different reasons, and they have a different understanding of gain and loss. And then on 24 Feb, they did cross the border, and the only thing that I can do was send the signal I had prepared the evening before with my commander, saying, so guys, whatever it is you do, don't be provoked, try to prevent escalation, but be ready and don't have yourself be pushed back in any way. But this wake-up call, I mean, Secure had preparing the nations and they moved forward as one. And that was the first time in NATO that all member states were very decisive. They showed this cohesion and resilience and determination. So, well, this is something that we cannot tolerate, a sovereign nation being invaded, and it was unprovoked and unjustified. Now we need to take a stance, and we need to start investing, supporting, and until now we have sent billions of euros and mostly of equipment. I mean, we would have loved to send a Patriot unit here, but we don't have them anymore. They're in Ukraine. So we are happy that we can support with a unit that comes here to train for 2 weeks. But we heavily invested. But that was not the end of it in Ukraine, because another step was taken by the Russians with the, we could simply not attribute it to the Russians at all, but the incident with the Nord Stream pipeline in the Baltic. It showed us in a very, very strong way the vulnerability of our critical underseas infrastructure, that it needed to be protected, that at least we needed to gather intelligence and share intelligence on Russian movements around these pipelines to ensure that something like what happened to the Nord Stream would not happen again. So we now have in Markham, in Northwood, a maritime security center on critical underseas infrastructure, and also one in Brussels to share awareness and to ensure whenever these ships that have capability of collecting intelligence on underseas infrastructures, that they're very closely monitored, that the infrastructure is checked very regularly so that you can immediately detect anomalies. So that was a very costly lesson identified. And from that time, we have been providing support to the Baltic states, but also to Lithuania. I mean, we've been here with an Air Defense and Command Fribit when Vilnius hosted the NATO summit last year. There have been a lot of visits to the Baltic states with standing naval forces. I mean, when I commanded standing NATO Maritime Group 1, I've also visited Lithuania. I've been very warmly received, and at that point we also had cooperation with the Enhanced Forward Presence team doing naval fire support. And the next upcoming event will be the Patriot training. We have been deployed here with something called Steadfast Defender Quadrica, a very large movement and actually basically training the movement of reinforcements. We're really moving forward on that part. And we have now a budget, as already mentioned, slightly over 2%. And we continue to get that money. We will have a new government next week, but they have already said that they really, really think this is important, that they do have the intent to continue to invest in our safety, in our future. And something that we are now working on, and also a topic here during the conference, is civil resilience and preparedness, because you can say that you're ready, but now with not only military threats, but also hybrid threats. I mean, what you need to have to run a country, it's food, it's water, it's electricity, it's transportation, it's medical care. But now with, for instance, a cyber threat, you can easily put out of business a payment system. I mean, I can't imagine my country without the ability to do electronic payments, because there are many people that don't even carry money anymore, or that suddenly there would be no supply of electricity. So we are now starting an educational program for our civil partners, and that's civilians, but it's also for the industry, that they've got a responsibility to support the military when they go abroad, and that for the protection of our critical national infrastructure, some of it lies with the government, but a lot also with civilian companies. So there's a lot of work to do, and there's also a lot for us to learn from the way that you do that in Lithuania, and also, for instance, in Finland, because there are many countries that go very far ahead of it where it comes to civil preparedness and resolve. But we will continue, and we will continue to be a very strong advocate of cooperation and resolve in NATO, because as the NATO motto says, we have to stand strong because we are stronger together, and our strongest point is that we are allies and that we support each other. So our coherence and our way of working together, that is something that Russia doesn't have and never will, because their only allies are the Chinese, and that's only a marriage of convenience. So I expect this to be a very fruitful conference, because we've got very capable panels waiting for us. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Rear Admiral, and we'll begin our panel discussion, and for that I invite Adam Roževič, who is going to be the moderator. He's a policy analyst at ESC. Adam, please.
Thank you, Linus, for a kind invitation. Introduction. I would like to begin our first panel for today's conference. Firstly, I would like to invite all the speakers of this panel to the floor. So it's Colonel Peter Nielsen from NATO Force Integration Unit in Lithuania, Ruslanas Baranovas, advisor to Dovydas Šakalienė, member of Lithuanian Parliament, Gert Jan, Europe reporter from BNR News Radio, and Vytautas Krašanskas, a senior advisor at Ministry of National Defense of Lithuania. So today's panel is on NATO defense and deterrence in the eastern flank, security through strengthened bilateral relations, cooperation and relations. Thank you all for being here. I believe that the panel will be great and very fruitful. So without any further ado, I would like speakers to begin with the opening remarks, and just very briefly to share how do you see the situation right now? What is your perspective on current status quo? So, Colonel, maybe we can start with you. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Admiral, colleagues, dear guests. Thank you for the invitation to come here. I'm surrounded by a lot of knowledgeable people, so I'll try to keep strictly to the NATO picture with a short perception also on the threat, and I will start with that. So I'm sometimes wondering what we should name this period we are in now, and I haven't really found the right term for it. We are certainly not in peace. I think it's more than competition. It's in a kind of a crisis, but maybe we could see it as a Cold War, not the exact same old Cold War we had, but with a hybrid war on top of that, a very hot hybrid war that is increasingly in scope, in speed, and in scale all the time. And it's also reaching out. So it's not just the disinformation and the cyber area, it's now the critical infrastructure, but it's also the cultural area, it's the religious area, it's non-lethal direct energy weapon that's harming and also mentally harming diplomats and officers from the US and Canada, as we've seen with the Havana syndrome. So a lot of really nasty things are going on in this hybrid war. And I think this is an area where we could actually push back more. We are always on the defensive side, as I see. We are thinking about what can we do here. But sometimes maybe we should be more on the offensive. What can we do? How can we use this spectrum to hit back on Russia? I think there are potential here to go back and do something more on it. I think the disinformation that was mentioned before, I think this is probably the most important thing, because it's hitting our central focal point, the cohesion of the alliance and the support of our populations. And if they succeed, Russia, to change this, then we really have a problem. So this is something that we need to take really much into consideration. And I also think that the fact that we have intelligence chiefs from the UK, from Germany lately, and maybe also from the Netherlands and Lithuania for sure, being very vocal and open about this threat is a picture that, so we should not be in doubt that the danger is clear and it's present right now. Looking to the nearer geography in Kaliningrad, the threat is not as big as it was prior to the Russian invasion in 22. Some of the conventional forces has been moved away from Kaliningrad, but as a result of the inclusion of Sweden and Finland to the alliance, we have seen a revision of the Russian structure, initially on paper, but eventually it will mean an increase of Russian forces in the near area close to Lithuania. So this is also something that we need to take into consideration. And I think we have a Russian society that has been now transformed into a war economy. And I'm still I'm normally a patient guy, but I'm really impatient for our societies here to mirror this and to establish some kind of war economy in our country so that we can match this qualitative edge that Russia still have compared to what we are capable of developing. On the other hand, I think we've seen NATO really responding very significant to this threat. As mentioned before, I think we have had 3 really amazing exercises this spring, and one is still ongoing, the biggest NATO exercise in the Baltic Sea, Baltops, which involved 40 ships that visited Klaipėda recently, never seen before in this size in the Baltics. We've seen the Quadriga, as the Admiral also mentioned, the biggest German deployment and exercise for 30 years. The Steadfast Defender umbrella exercise is also a big exercise that involved the transfer of US troops from the Atlantic, over the Atlantic to Europe, and a lot of connected exercises to this. So within many fields, I think we have shown that we match Russia, but there is still work to do. So I can go further into the details on this later during the question, but I think I will leave it here.
Thank you. Ruslani?
Hello. First of all, let me say that it's always a pleasure to get back to my alma mater. And a lot of good words were already said about Netherlands and their contribution to the safety of Lithuania. And I think it's not many people probably in Lithuania know the extent to which Netherlands are, in a sense, even security provider for Lithuania. So thanks again. And I think in general, you know, how things are going, things take rather long when they are in hands of politicians, and then they are rather quick when they are in hands of military. So in this sense, everything seems to go fine. And of course, probably one of the biggest challenges is what you spoke about, what we are currently sort of in a hybrid war below the threshold of Article 5. And we don't know sometimes how to respond. And there is also a question of responsibility. For example, if Lithuania takes certain steps and they end badly, how other partners will look at that? So this is a very important question. But I will just go to my main point. Being trained here as a philosopher, I was witnessing the preparations for Vilnius summit. I was in some meetings, sitting there, listening. I was preparing notes for members of parliament. For other meetings, I was hearing their feedback. And I think one thing we lack today, and which really sort of undermines our efforts, is coherent intellectual paradigm, with coherent set of ideas about what we are doing. Because today, in a sense, we are recycling. We have some Cold War ideas we are recycling. We have some, let's say, idealist ideas which came in the first decade after collapse of Soviet Union about changed free trade and so on, engagement. And we are not only recycling these ideas, but we're also looking at them in fragmented matter. For example, we are thinking about deterrence. One bunch of people are thinking about deterrence, another bunch are thinking about economical relations. Yeah? And sometimes what we do in the field of deterrence is not in line or even contradicts what we're trying to do in terms of economical relations. And in this way, we are sort of building Frankenstein from all these different ideas, and then for example, in Lithuania, probably not the most favorite person, Jake Sullivan, he has this sort of coherent set of ideas brought from Cold War, about escalation management and so on and so on. And we are not happy with that, but we sort of don't have what to offer instead of it. And even I think that the question, of building this set of ideas and then concrete steps in different domains is sort of considered to be a bad taste question and maybe even sort of harmful diplomatically, because if you try to talk about this, you will have to speak about how do you see Russia in the future? How do we want Russia to be in the future? How do we want China to behave? How do we want some region to be shaped? And that immediately sounds like, this bad interventionist regime change politics, which is discredited in the West. So even the question itself is sort of, as I said, it's sort of bad taste question, but without it, we always run into the same problems. I noticed many meetings where politicians come, they read their memos, and it's like 90% of things we agree on. But there are these like 5% of questions which we either don't talk about. For example, what is victory in Ukraine? What is our end goal? So usually nobody talks about it. In the end of a meeting, it comes up. And then it's like 5 minutes left. People exchange something, and they go back to their respective capitals, and basically nothing changed after the meeting. So I think what in this intellectual, first of all, endeavor, we have to answer the question, how do we win this competitional Cold War, whatever we call it, without entering an actual war? This would be question number one. How do we see Russia and China in the world in some sustainable manner? Because in Lithuania, I would say there is like, I don't know, 25% probably or 50% of people who think Russia should disintegrate. Our goal should be disintegration of Russia and many republics, but probably in Netherlands, a lot less people would think this is a good idea, and in the United States even probably less. But the question is, how do we see Russia? What deterrence mean? Because deterrence always happens in the head of your enemy, and it's really hard to sort of bring the message to either Putin or Xi Jinping or other leaders. How do we see economical cooperation? Because now we don't talk about it a lot, in a sense. We talk about decoupling, about de-risking, and stuff like that. You can see changes, but we don't have answers. And the last thing I would say would be about Stratcom, what you were speaking, How do we win this battle of ideas, both abroad, but also inside of our countries? Because the main probably problem, and it's also practical, but also philosophical, also democratic, is how do we do this without undermining our values? Because the question about disinformation is always the question about access to any information, right to free speech, because nobody can, ban somebody because he is speaking something we don't like. So I would say if we can answer all these questions in a coherent manner, then maybe we can speak with partners, maybe other countries, and have a way forward. Maybe not to Washington, but to the next NATO summit.
Thank you. Hert, what is your perspective from Netherlands on how do you see the current affairs in the world?
Oh, the current affairs in the world. That's
That's irrelevant to our topic.
Can I zoom out? Thank you, Adam. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name is Geert-Jan Haan from the Netherlands. I'm a journalist, so I'm like a senior Europe reporter. I'm like a fly on the European wall. The politicians and the military in the room, they know stuff. You and think tankers think about stuff, and I think that I know stuff. That's the difference, I think. So we do a lot of radio, we do a lot of podcasts, and I used to live in Ukraine a long time ago during European Football Championship when they were organizing. Brings back memories these days. I just left before Russia annexed Crimea, but decided to travel back and forth. And now I'm covering all of Europe. A little bit less focused on hardcore defense, but more like, well, how can we intertwine politics, diplomacy, the public, civil society, and defense. 5th time in Lithuania, 4th time in 2 years' time. Even spent my holiday here last year, celebrating Jonines, if that's the right pronunciation, at the campsite near Platile, but heavily disturbed by a phone call from my boss who was saying, Prigozhin is on his way to Moscow. So that was the end of my holiday. And there were NATO exercises as well in June 2023. So yeah, I was kind of in the working field as well. Coming back to your question, how do I look at things? I'm traveling a lot in Central and Eastern Europe, covering the eastern flank as a journalist. Even paid a visit to Cyprus a few weeks ago, which is not NATO but EU and pretty important for geographically for the defense of Europe as well. Same goes for Moldova, who have a neutrality vision on the matter, but are also more and more integrated with NATO, of course. Looking back at the Vilnius summit and with the summit coming up in Washington, I would like to refer to a few things. I think if we look at the Vilnius communique, it was so clear that everyone sees Russia as an aggressor. That's not a question anymore. The importance of air defense and our lack of air defense became even more clear last year. And I'm afraid we will see the result of that next winter in Ukraine. Where energy infrastructure is really in bad condition. So the upcoming winter will be a tough one for civilians and politicians, but cynically, if we will see then horror footage from Ukrainians freezing to death and another influx of refugees in Europe, this will only strengthen our full solidarity with Ukraine. So I would say overall, in the NATO area, public support for Ukraine stabilized. It's not a question. Regarding preparedness and public awareness, from military mobility to conscription, you see that in every country there's a discussion. But like the minister said, some countries just woke up and other countries are already prepared. in the Netherlands, we're happy that we made the defense investment pledge. But here in Lithuania, your Minister of Defense already told Mr. Rolbauer last week that we should talk about 3%, so step up. And politically, just look at point 5 of the Vilnius communique, I would say, because I think that all NATO heads of state still agree on the fact that the peace is shattered, has been shattered in the Euro-Atlantic area by Russia. It gave Jens Stoltenberg last year, I think it was in April, the opportunity to bring in some new initiatives, proposing this $100 billion 5-year fund to plan long-term Ukraine aid. It's still under debate. It will be less. There's a new proposal spending, I think, $43 billion a year on lethal and non-lethal aid for Ukraine. But since overall, and that will be my main point, public and political support for Ukraine stabilized and did not degrade, this means there is a political space to move ahead, to think about the stuff you are mentioning, to structure and plan long-term Ukraine aid, which is in the interest of the NATO alliance as well. And I think the final point I will make is, when I was in the room, in the press room at the NATO summit in Vilnius, and we saw the presentation of the G7 members of all the bilateral security agreements they would support for Ukraine, I think that media, civil society, especially in Western Europe, kind of underestimates the importance of that, because it gives Ukraine long-term support. It gives Ukraine the opportunity to stay a sovereign country on the long term. So even though Ukraine and Zelensky did not get what he wanted at the summit in Vilnius, and he made a lot of fuss about it, and then Ben Wallace was saying, friend, it's not Amazon here, you can't get everything that you want in one day, but okay. I think he should be really thankful for that. G7 countries stepped up. It gave the Netherlands and Denmark and other countries opportunity to jump on that train. And it gave NATO members the opportunity to say, hey, it's a G7 initiative. We're not escalating from a NATO perspective towards Russia. So we're creative in a way. And together with what we're seeing right now, coming up, well, with the Washington summit coming up, I think it was a fruitful year, but we will discuss Mark Rutte becoming probably the new Secretary General. He has some challenges.
Thank you. Vytautai?
Yeah, hello. Great privilege and honor to be here. Thank you for inviting, especially being an alumni of both Vilnius University and Eastern Europe Studies Center. Great honor. So I'll try to be quick, and let's have a discussion afterwards. I'm looking, of course, at the situation through a MOD lens, and I subscribe to a lot of, paradigm shifts, I believe, happened. And 10 years ago, we had some Dutch exchange students in Vilnius University. We had interesting conversations, and we were talking about threat perception. I was talking about Russia. They were talking about the ocean. And I was trying to convince that Russia is the main threat, and they said, not for us, and besides, there's Germany between us and Russia, so it doesn't matter. And then we are here now. We have the same threat perception. We are united. We are coherent, and NATO's decisions which took place in Madrid, in Vilnius, and which will be taken in Washington, are continuous effort recognizing Russia as a long-term threat to Euro-Atlantic security, recognizing that NATO's key role is collective defense and defend every inch of alliance, and implementing this as we speak. The Rear Admiral presented these developments in very extensive matter. Colonel mentioned practical examples as we speak. NATO is preparing its plans, it's reviewing its C2 structures, it's assigning forces regionally, it's training. The most extensive training cycle has happened this year since the end of Cold War. And it will continue to do so. So we are on the right footing. Just the security environment, Russia's wartime mode, which is a pure fact, and again recognized by all, keeps this situation uncertain, which means it can develop in any matter, which keeps us to be urgent to implement decisions further. And again, the footing is there. It was set in Madrid, continued in Vilnius, and Washington will make further decisions. What we as a nation must do, and what we recognize all, is that Russia's war against Ukraine, Russia perceives it as a war against the West as well. And it also makes it an industrial attrition war. For that, we need industrial response. My minister mentioned about the defense funding and the urgency of increasing that further beyond 2%. It is more and more recognized across the alliance, especially on the eastern flank. We need to turn this money into capabilities. So the money is not just a percentage. The money is capabilities. Capabilities we need to defend and deter successfully. The industrial part is also important to continue support Ukraine, as European security depends on Ukraine's success in its war, in its defense against Russia. And for Lithuania, what my minister mentioned, the 3% is something we want to achieve already this year, and we want to turn this into contracts. So this is what we need to aim for, and this is one of the key deliverables being discussed now coming up to Washington summit. So how we mobilize money, how we turn this into contracts to make sure our industry is capable of to sustain, to fill the gaps which came up with our huge support to Ukraine, and making sure that Ukraine can continuously defend and prevail. So I don't want to be repetitive, so I put in this industrial part into this conversation, and I think I'll stop here and let's continue further.
Thank you. Just before I open the floor for audience to ask questions, I will ask a few questions of my own. Maybe we could start with you, Colonel. In 2022, in 2023, during the NATO summits, we did quite ambitious, NATO did quite ambitious pledges regarding the strengthening security, deterrence, and going back to defense, to this hard defense sphere. How do you evaluate the progress since then? Are we on track, or are we off track, where we could be better, where we are already succeeding, and how we can move forward?
Thank you. I will probably go back to the Madrid summit and just stress that during that summit, we saw the big change from the old strategic concept of deterrence, the tripwire, as the Admiral also mentioned, or the concept of hope, to the much more hardcore concept that clearly defined Russia as a present threat for NATO, and implementing a concept of kind of like in the old times, as I also remember, of forward defense, but of defense and deterrence. And after that summit, NATO started doing their regional plans. And in the Vilnius summit, we saw the approval of the 3 regional plans, and they were massive, they were really detailed, and there was a comprehensive capability list linked to them in order to make them executable. And after the Vilnius summit, the tactical planning of these operational level plans started, and meaning in this area that the multinational core Northeast started to look into how will we conduct the defense of the Baltic countries and the northwestern part of Poland, and what is the threat as we see it, and again, what is the verified number of capabilities and forces we need in order to execute these plans. And this detailed tactical planning will continue in the coming years eventually coming down to that every platoon knows where their position is and that every soldier knows where his foxhole is. So this is the kind of detailed planning that I remember from the last years of the Cold War, also as when I was a tank platoon leader. So we need to get into that detail, and we need to, and that's ongoing right now. It's not finished, it will probably continue for 1.5 years more or 2 before we get down to that detail, and that need to be revised and exercised, of course. But also we need to look into the sustainment of this. I mean, we are talking about a massive number of forces that potentially will be here in Lithuania. There's the new Lithuanian division, as we heard about, and the German is not just a German brigade permanently stationed here with logistic being able to fight a number of weeks. It's also the German division back in Germany at a high readiness, able to deploy and support the defense of Lithuania should that be needed. And because we have Kaliningrad with the missile bubble around that area, we need to sufficiently degrade that bubble so that we can sustain the forces in Lithuania, not only through the Suwałki corridor, but also through, luckily, the new NATO countries, Sweden. If you look at the map from the coast of Latvia to the nearest part of Gotland, the Swedish carrier in the Baltic Sea, there's just 150 kilometers. From Klaipėda to Gotland, Gotland is closer than Vilnius is to Klaipėda. So it's a huge difference for the defense of this country. It has added a depth that we didn't have before, and that can be utilized, of course, and should be. But this is also something that we need to work on. Before we have this missile capabilities sufficiently degraded, we need to be able to operate without super connections to the deeper west, meaning that we need to have the necessary supplies in place in Lithuania. And this will be a huge number of ammunition depots that needs to be created. It's the same area where there will be training grounds and evacuations going on. So there's a lot of planning that needs to be worked out on this sustainment part. In a way, it's easier just to draw some lines on the map and see this is how we're going to fight the front line. But the sustainment part, this is where the really big, tricky issues is. So we'll see how that, but I will say that Germany is forward-leaning on this, and this is really good. I'm not so happy about some of the NATO progress within this area, but I know Germany is forward-leaning and in close contact with Lithuania, so this is good.
Thank you. Vytautai, we're just a few weeks away from the summit, NATO summit in DC. What are the realistic expectations from that summit? Will it be just only a celebration of anniversary of NATO, or we could expect something concrete, both in regards of security of our region or in regards of NATO-Ukraine relations?
Yeah, thank you. So, every summit is a success summit, it's just a matter of fact. But as mentioned, so fundamental shifts and decisions take time to implement. Thus, we don't need every year to reinvent something and add something more on top. So the framework is set in Madrid, continued in Vilnius, and Washington will show of the progress with the implementation of deterrence and defense agenda. We are working hard every day to do, and what Colonel again explicitly explained, what does it mean on the ground. For us as well, I mentioned already German brigade, which we're working on to station permanently and which will achieve its full operational capability in 2027 here in Lithuania. We are recognizing the progress, and Summit will recognize the progress across the alliance with forward defense, with the forward land forces, which are being developed across the eastern flank. We also aim for some deliverables on integrated air and missile defense, as we see in Russia's war against Ukraine, how critical protection of the skies are to, and how Russia is using all type of capabilities in trying to basically destroy a country and how it's warfighting in this domain. So we expect some deliverables on that. The Dutch decision to come with Patriot missile system for training, we see it as a great example to kick off a rotational model, which we expect will continue further in this region. This is another thing. When it comes to NATO-Ukraine relations, and Ukraine package is highly discussed, of course, and we expect some results on that, and we are working on that for sure. Both the political track, the finance and long-term financial commitment track, and the NATO-Ukraine integration track, which is also critical, fostering Ukraine's future membership in the alliance.
Ruslana, you mentioned a very interesting idea about the coherence of ideas. And do you see any improvement in that? Because we understand that we all have very similar goals, but there is no concrete strategy or, I don't know, the aims or the execution of these aims differs. Not only differs in EU or NATO, but very much differs from country to country. So how do you see this being 2.5 years already in war? Is there any improvement to that?
The short answer would be no. But, you know, we can just see how our rhetoric is moving, you know. At first, we like here in our part of the wood, we pushed for a formula until Ukraine wins. Then some other countries pushed for more, maybe, you know, not so ambitious, but however long it takes, you know. So this really shows, I think, already this, you know, rhetoric is very important in such matters. You know, people are, this level people are not speaking, you know, just anything what comes to mind. So this shows already some kind of, I don't know, differences, maybe not differences, but nuances in their outlooks. And I don't see much talk about that. Even in leading think tanks. It's usually also just put as a problem, but I didn't see any serious attempts, you know, to build something up from the ground on this matter.
You mentioned already very interesting aspect of upcoming summit, the new Secretary General, and this is a public secret that Dutch Prime Minister Rutte is the favorite to attain this seat. Could you very briefly tell us about, just brief us, what we can expect? What can you share about it? Some things that maybe embassy wouldn't like us to know or something like that. But what is your take on that?
Well, we have a former foreign policy advisor of Mark Rutte in the room, so I don't think I can surprise the ambassador. First, the procedure, maybe, for the people who don't know. We have so many people here in the room and watching that maybe the procedure is interesting. There is a favorite candidate, which is Mark Rutte, and there is another candidate, Klaus Johannes, president from Romania, who is the only one left. And he is on his own. And what I hear is that in Romania there will be a meeting in the Defense Council tomorrow, and they will probably say then that it's over for him. And then in a few days' time, there can be a dean's coffee. So the senior NATO ambassador will call all the other ones and say, hey, you want a coffee? Come over to my place. So the other 31 ambassadors, they come to him. It's a Croatian, Mr. Mario Nobilo, if I'm correct. He will invite the other ambassadors. Did any positions change? Well, the Hungarian position and the Slovakian position changed. I mean, they did not say who they wanted to support. Now they did say they will support Rutte, so they will mention that over coffee and some delicious sweets. And then hopefully the Romanian candidate will do the same, the ambassador of Romania. And then there will be a council, a North Atlantic Council meeting to formalize the procedure. And then Rutte can take the flight to Washington, D.C., where Stoltenberg will still be the Secretary General, but from 1st of October on, they will probably switch, and he will become, Rutte will become the next Secretary General. And it will be very interesting. If he is, it's hard to say if he is the right guy for the job. I think there are some other European leaders who could do well. I think of Mette Frederiksen and a few other ones. But it's clear that Rutte has been around for so many years now in Europe, and that we live in a time that a lot of things are changing, a lot of leaders might be changing. Just look at France, we don't know which way it will go. And I think it's good that there is some stability and someone you can count on. The question will be regarding the eastern flank. How will he deal with all the different tastes and flavors that all these Central and Eastern European countries have? From the Dutch perspective, everything behind Brandenburg is the same. It's the Eastern Bloc. But we know that in Lithuania, you say, please stand up to Putin and to Russia. While they say in Slovakia and Hungary nowadays, and maybe Slovenia as well, please stop the war, which is a totally different perspective. We're talking about rhetorics. So how can Rutte deal with that? We have seen the kind of opt-out Orban was looking for. He got it from Stoltenberg. It will be, I think, a binding opt-out as well from Rutte, which means that Orban and Hungary will not be involved in any more activity regarding Ukraine, like training Ukrainian troops. Which is, from one hand, fine from our perspective, because we can think, okay, that guy, the way Rutte called him, he cannot block our bloc anymore. But from the other perspective, what if Marine Le Pen comes to power and is going to Secretary General Rutte and is saying, hey, I want an opt-out on this, I don't want to get involved in that? Then the unity of NATO is under threat. So that will be interesting to watch for the upcoming years, from my perspective. I'm a journalist, I can say whatever I like, I'm not bound to do anything.
Thank you. Do you have any questions or opinions from the audience? Yes, please.
Thank you. Valdas Rakutis, military historian and member of the parliament now. I will concentrate on some important questions. First question is, Johan, very important note. We have to think also about offense. No wars was won only by defense. No one war in history was won only by defense. It's impossible, theoretically impossible. And when we talk about hybrid warfare, and I know that in Helsinki, they have special NATO competence center for hybrid or anti-hybrid warfare. And they present one book about scenarios. And I ask, what about second volume of this book? Is our answers to the hybrid warfare? They say, oh, no. You never win war if you not make counter-offense. It's impossible. And we, limited by our ideas, as you said, we limited us from the victory in all possible way. We limited our brains and say, no, it's impossible. But exists some history of military art. It's my favorite topic in military academy for 21 years. And principles of wars. If you not use principle of wars, one of them is initiative. If you not take initiative, you will never win. It's impossible. So I think we have to, step by step, not revolutionary way, to change our brains and say, if you will win a war, you have to use principles of wars. You have no other choices. Of course, it takes a time, not a lot of politicians finish history of military art. But military people have to say for civilians that we have no other options at all. Thank you very much. You are very close to victory.
Thank you. Would anyone would like to address that? Yeah, please.
So it's not, we are speaking constantly with Professor Rakutis in the halls of Seimas, but I just wanted to note on the Washington summit. I think that, it will be a success, and I'm very happy because, in winter, at least from information I have, which is mostly open, or just from Ukraine, things look pretty dark in Ukraine. And I was afraid that at the time of a summit, it will be really dark. And then we will have to, there will be situation when things are going bad, and in the summit, there are no very good and brave decisions. But now, things are looking much better than in winter. So I think in this context also the summit will be more successful because we don't have that context.
Because we have just a few minutes left. Yes, please.
Good afternoon, Member of the Parliament, Marius Matijošaitis, Foreign Affairs. My question will be to the Dutch panelists, if possible, because I'll talk about the rules-based society and human rights and the way that our enemy behaves. And Russia is not respecting any international law norms. And so my question will be a bit specific about the Oslo Convention. As in the Parliament, we already collected about 100 signatures to denounce this convention, because when we talk about the mines, the ones that we might buy from South Korea or the US, and at some point would be able to use in counteroffensive if that's needed. But obviously this is in contradiction to the norms of the rules-based society and our norms of the way we would like to respect human rights, right? Because those mines are extremely, extremely dangerous when it comes to accidents if they don't explode the way that the ones Russia and North Korea builds, basically, the way they produce. So how would you sort of react in this dilemma of, on the one hand, wanting to have this convention, but for example, in the region, Estonia, Latvia, and Poland doesn't have it ratified. So we are the only ones, and the transit of those mines is not possible through the land, for example, so only by the sea in the time of the conflict if that happens. So my question will be about the dilemma of, I already sort of formulated my question. So the different types of ammunition and different types of committing warfare with the enemy that doesn't respect any norms, and us as a NATO country, civilized world that is respecting norms and would like to continue respecting laws. How would you approach that?
Oh, I thought you were Dutch. Sorry.
Well, I will just say I kind of agree, and this is my personal opinion now. I agree with your perspective in this. Of course, there might be some kind of weapons and some kind of treaties we might just leave there. But just recalling the discussion about the cluster ammunition that we in the West were too what do you call it, sacred or caution to support Ukraine with, and they were asking for them for their territory. They were planning on going into the area after they used this, so they knew the consequences, and we were kind of trying to have a moral overview on this. I think that was a really bad approach from our perspective. We need to look into how the enemy is using this and then counter that. Otherwise, we are just increasing the risk for our own soldiers, and as we did with the Ukrainians.
From a Dutch perspective, you know, every time when I come to Vilnius, I look at that big skyscraper to see if the text is still there. Putin, The Hague is waiting for you, and it's still there. So we in The Hague have the city of peace and justice. So from that point of view, you would say like we should do whatever it takes, here's the sentence again, to support Ukraine and to save all those lives. From another point of view, which is more a political point of view, I guess, looking at Dutch politics as an outsider, I think that for over the last 10 years, we already moved a little bit from the side from not wanted to escalate with Russia to be a little bit more on the side of Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Poland, understanding each other a little bit more, understanding the mindset of the Lithuanians, that if there is an aggressor, please stand up against the aggressor. But I think that we're still in the middle. And therefore, I think that's partly the reason that we're not standing up as much as you do. And I think we'll always have that in mind, like, okay, we don't want to escalate, even though we know that we can't let Russia win, right? So I think we're still not clear. We still didn't make our mind up, from my point of view, even though we have the city of justice and peace. And we should bring Putin to court in The Hague, even though that is the sentence you hear politicians in the Netherlands say as well. But in their minds, I think that they're still not willing to accept that we're in the middle. I'm sounding a bit like you from a philosophical point of view, right? But I think that's the case.
Thank you. So just before we head off for a short coffee break that will last for 15 minutes sharp, please join me in a round of applause to our speakers. Thank you. And now we'll have a short break for 15 minutes. Please, there is some coffee and snacks. Thank you.
Okay, welcome back with a little bit less participants. It's always a risk of having a coffee break that some participants will run away, but we always approach coffee breaks as a very valuable and important time for networking. So welcome back to the second session. My name is Simona Merkinaitė. I'm from the Eastern European Studies Center, and I will moderate our second panel that is called Adapting to the Unknown, the Emerging Challenges and Strategic Outlook. So I think Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine not only put itself pressure on the Western countries and European Union and NATO, but overall the war exposed more in-depth and systematic challenges that are in the West. It seems like the mere fact that the NATO, the strongest and the biggest defense and security alliance in history, found itself unready for the war and faces a lot of problems and challenges, such as scaling up production, for example, shows that probably strategically, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, we were sort of strategically building on this idea that in Europe the war is impossible and we'll have the age of peace and prosperity. So that's the challenge also. I think the assumption that the international structure architecture will hold up thanks to our Western values is also sort of shaking up, and it's not only proven by the ongoing attacks from the non-democratic entities and countries to intervene in our international relations and challenge the international security architecture, but also the challenges that come from our societies as well. The rise of populism, of radical movements and anti-democratic movements all across the Western countries in the US and in Europe. Add to that the ongoing changes, including demographical changes in Europe and in Western countries, climate change, the spread of and development of artificial intelligence, all in all, puts us not only into the very unfamiliar territory, but sort of asks us to rethink how we build our strategies. So this is the panel sort of to address not only security, but broader challenges that we face with. And we have a very capable panel here that will provide expertise from different angles. So let me start with the introduction. Here we have Professor Margarita Šešelgytė. She is the director of Institute of International Relations and Political Science. Then we have Mindaugas Silkauskas, deputy director at the Transatlantic Cooperation and Security Policy Department at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Then we have Edvinas Grikšas, acting group head of innovation policy at the Ministry of Economy and Innovation of Republic of Lithuania, and our esteemed guest from the Netherlands, Rem Kortweg, right? Great. The senior researcher at the Klingendal Institute, who is also focused on Europe's strategic role in the world, with a specific focus on intersection between foreign policy, trade, and security issues. So I will have our panel make the first remarks, and then I will have a couple of questions, and I encourage the auditorium also to raise questions on those very different issues. So Margarita, maybe then let's start with you, because you're the closest here. How you would describe the main challenges and emerging threats that we face in the 21st century, and how maybe the third year of the war maybe helps us to either solve them or further expose them?
Thank you, Simona, indeed, for a very kind introduction, and also appreciate the invitation to be a part of this panel. And just a piece of information, I'm just back from Amsterdam, where I was participating in another conference where we were discussing security challenges, so I've got already a bit scoop about what's happening in the Netherlands. And it seems for me that we are getting more and more on the same boat in understanding what security challenges we are facing and in understanding how to react to those challenges, because what I've heard, that Netherlands has just approved its first hybrid security strategy, analyzing hybrid security threats for the Netherlands and also trying to find the tools how to react to them. So I think that when we have to look on what's happening at what's happening in the security environment, probably we have to have a bit broader picture and see the general trends in the international politics. First of all, changing power balance. Changing power balance when the power is shifting more to other areas of the world than Europe, than the Western Hemisphere. And if you look at the history of international relations, whenever these changing balances have occurred, we had major challenges for the existing international orders. And when we have the shifting international orders, we are facing more conflicts in the international politics. And I think that what we are facing in Ukraine, in Israel, Palestine, in Africa, the certain escalating situation in Indo-Pacific is exactly the consequence of the general global power shift. And this has to be borne in mind. And on one hand, we see the conventional conflicts happening in Ukraine. We're not expecting that this kind of war would be possible in the 21st century, but still here we are, because some powers are still very modern, not postmodern powers. But at the same time, we're facing different kind of conflicts, asymmetric conflicts, which are happening in multiple domains. And the problem that they're happening in multiple domains at the same time with a very fast speed, and it might very fast escalate from one domain to another. Another challenge, talking about these security threats, is that many of them do not require a lot of resources. So it has an asymmetric effect. Sometimes countries with limited resources, not very rich countries, authoritarian countries, have a strategic advantage over us in these particular domains like cyber or information, etc. Another trend that is to be observed is interdependency, which has been facilitated by the globalization. And although since COVID pandemic, since the war started in Ukraine, there is this sort of attempt to go more regional, however, we are very globalized and very interdependent. And on one hand, this is a big advantage for our economies, for the development, but this could be a huge security vulnerability if it is manipulated by malicious actors of international politics. One more trend is heavy dependency on infrastructure because of the development of our societies, development of our economies. We are increasing dependency on energy, on infrastructure like roads, internet, and we have to take care of this infrastructure because we are becoming very vulnerable if there are attacks on this infrastructure. And last but not least is the certain development of tribal identities within the society, which leads to polarization, which leads to populism and radicalization of the political parties and the parts of the societies. And to add to this, we are having enablers like development of modern technologies, artificial intelligence, which are increasing the power, the disruptive power of these possible challenges. So what do we do in this very precarious situation where, you know, all these vulnerabilities, interdependencies can be easily weaponized and manipulated by the countries which are searching to change the balance and searching to inflict the damage on the international order, although sometimes they don't have the certain power to do that, but they have asymmetric power. And there is a lot of talk about the Iran, China, North Korea, Russia axis, and they are more and more cooperating in using these instruments. So what is the strategy? And it's a very difficult question, because what do you do when you are encountering, as former US Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld defined the challenges that are unknown unknowns. You don't know where to look to, where those challenges are coming from. So you have to invest a lot in resilience. And first of all, trying to understand interdependencies that you have with the world. Which countries are having huge interdependencies? Are those countries authoritarian? Can these interdependencies be manipulated? And Lithuania is a very good example of such a manipulations. For instance, when Lithuania decided to host Taiwanese representation in Vilnius, China, of course, retaliated. And beforehand, there was an investigation made into our interdependencies with China on the economic side as well. So the trade, investments, the interdependencies were very low. But China was very inventive. So what did it do? It used the indirect approach. It used the secondary sanctions, trying to blackmail the companies, the Western companies, which worked with Lithuania. So it was a repercussion which we didn't foresee. So that's what's happening in the current security environment, and we have to be prepared for that. Another very important point is to prepare to take care of our infrastructure, strengthening the infrastructure, strengthening resilience. Of course, it's very difficult to do because it's a lot, and in particular for a small country, because our resources are quite limited. But the raising awareness of the society and the people is very important in this particular respect. For instance, Estonians were asked how they're dealing with the electricity disruption, and they said, it's, you know, our people live not in a very concentrated space. They're used to that. They have generators. So I think that every country can follow certain example and take certain approach, but this is where our eyes have to be put on. And last but not least, I know I'm speaking a lot, but I'm a professor, so that's the usual, I guess. Societies, resilience of the societies, and that's the most complicated part of the strategy. How do you ensure resilience of the society? So first of all, to infrastructure disruptions, but that's the easy part, to the disruptions of the mindset, to the encouragements for more polarization, to tribalism, living in your identity bubbles. Two recommendations probably. One is working on the critical mindset since the early life. Finland is a wonderful example of how they're introducing critical teaching in the schools. For instance, the pupil in the first grades are debating the politicians and their programs before the elections to know what they are voting for. I think that this is a wonderful example, and this brings the revenue later on. But also working with the parts of the societies that don't see their future in the country, and there are a lot of parts of the society that feel like that. And surprisingly for me, also young people in some bubbles, identity bubbles. So here I stop. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, and really good to be back to Alma Mater, and thanks for inviting I will structure my intro into three parts, like challenges, what Margarita already addressed, vulnerabilities, our own vulnerabilities, and how to respond or how to address. So it's without going, it's very clear for everyone that the war returned to Europe. Russia is exercising a conventional offensive war against Ukraine, and it remains a conventional threat. But on the same time, this war is not limited only to Ukraine and to Russia. So, and that's why we are facing, as already was said, huge challenges in Euro-Atlantic area, where most probably the same actors are behind. So why? The question always should be asked why. And my simple answer to that would be that we, the West, we always play by the book. We are very much easy to understand, to read, and we are very much predictable. Restraining ourselves from actions which could contain our adversaries from stepping into against our interests. And this is, in my opinion, why. And of course, the war itself exacerbated all those challenges. And the arc of authoritarian regimes of, so to say, adversaries towards us, they are cementing against us. Just take a look on the latest visits from Putin, whom and where and for what reason he meets. And definitely, in one sentence, is to cement policies against this West, to dismantle this rule-based international order. Why, again, on top of that, we are playing by the book? Also, the challenge, what personally myself may identify, is that this year is particularly shaky, might be shaky, because we had already a number of European elections already in a number of countries, but still very big elections are in the pipeline. If we can still predict to a certain extent what's going to happen in UK, but in France, elections, presidential elections in US, this might bring a certain shaky period in the alliances. I'm not referring only to NATO, but EU as well, alliances of like-minded, where we will have to adjust and to understand what's going on. So this is a very big challenge for this and next year to come. Also, 2%, I'm coming back to defense, of course, spending, which in Wales 10 years ago, all allies pledged for 2% for defense. That was after Crimea, that was before Georgia, then it was followed by full-scale invasion into Ukraine, and still at the most, in summer, we might see 23 allies following this benchmark out of 32. Despite that the war in Europe returned. So again, this is constant chronic underinvestment, which is not only cash. This is capabilities, these are contributions, and this is cash, of course. And this is also part of how you can build the resilience, Margarita, to what Margarita alluded to. So, taking all this into account, our adversaries are tactically trying to diminish us as a West. What do they do? And this is not only this year, it's for years in a row that they are poisoning people abroad, that they are damaging our underwater infrastructure. They are jamming GPS signals, violating all aviation security rules. making challenges to pilots. Of course, there are alternatives, but what does that mean? Interfering, also sabotaging, arsoning. I'm not talking anymore about cyber offenses, to what we are as Lithuanians very much resilient, thanks to our institutions who heavily invested in the right time, disinformation area. So all these are challenges in Euro-Atlantic area. What to do? So, of course, all those actions and those who are behind very well know that they cannot reach Article 5 threshold. So that's why they are playing below. And that's why we also need to think, so how adequately the West can respond. And so primarily, we need to build common understanding in the whole Euro-Atlantic area, what's going on. What's obvious in Lithuania not necessarily might be obvious in capitals 1,000 or 2,000 kilometers away. So we need to bring and build constant understanding what's that. Secondly, we always, even if we have a fact, we do not dare to attribute. We most probably understand and know who is behind, but attribution always is a problem. With those actors who are instigating those, if you name and shame, you might achieve certain results. Thirdly, I think EU and NATO have their own toolboxes. So we might think of activating those toolboxes at the right time with political resolve to employ all those non-military instruments of power to, again, signal and deter. Thirdly, also, if we have issues of acting as EU or NATO, we might and need to think about coalitions of the willing. This is also strong instrument to act. And finally, I think if you build coalitions, if you unite and build understanding throughout Euro-Atlantic area, you might expect that certain countermeasures might be applied. And one of them, why not to think at EU level about new sanctions regime, addressing those who is behind those cyber campaign or hostile actions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so hello everyone. I'm very happy to be here today. Actually, I'm also almost at my alma mater. It's next door, Faculty of History, so yeah, quite like home for me. I'm not a military person. I will talk about from innovation side mostly. So, of course, 21st century brought us a lot of challenges, and last several years brought even more of these challenges, yeah? So we have to find, I guess we are searching, we are looking for, and we are finding for a holistic approach to all these problems because, yeah, just jump to technology, yeah? And jump to cinema a bit, yeah? Nowadays, horror films are about artificial intelligence, about cyber attacks, about self-driving cars, not about ghosts anymore, yeah? So we have to be prepared. I remember when first time I saw a self-driving car, just traveling in Vilnius, yeah, it's from one of the grocery stores network, working in the delivery system, yeah? At first I was like, oh, it's innovation, it's great, it's cool, wow, it's amazing. But the second thought was, what if not very friendly forces could manage to take over these vehicles, yeah? For example, in Vilnius we have 5 to 10, yeah? And 500 in Europe. So what if someone could manage to take over control and start just road accidents, yeah? It's part of hybrid war, yeah? Yeah, it's possible, yeah. So speaking more about technology, yeah, so I guess Europe was sneezing a bit, yeah? Now we are trying to look for our disruptive technologies like quantum technologies, for example, yeah? China, Russia, they're working on that for quite a lot of years, yeah? For example, with quantum-based computing, you can crack or hack a supercomputer in seconds, yeah? So we can guess that in 3 or 5 years, our intergovernmental governmental communication will be not safe anymore because of quantum technologies, yeah? And cybersecurity is very horizontal, I guess. It's not only about defense, it's about all the technologies, yeah? Health technologies, ICT, everything is about cybersecurity now because everything is based on data, based on internet. We can find everything everywhere, yeah? So energy resilience, another question. For example, we had this NATO Defense Innovation Accelerator Challenge. It was about energy resilience because just imagine, you are in the hot spot in the war, somewhere in the desert or in the taiga, I guess, yeah? And you have to think about logistics, yeah? You have generators running on fuel, yeah? And what if you have very innovative technology, energy technology, when you can have just luggage, which provides you energy for, I don't know, 1 month for all the brigade, yeah? It's game changers in the war. Yeah, so technologies, they brings us a lot of good in our lives, yeah? When it's peace, yeah? But it can be our worst enemy, I guess, if we didn't manage to have some counter-arguments for the technologies which are being used by not so friendly neighbors or other countries, yeah? So I guess nowadays war is more about technology and about hybrid parts of the war like never before. But looking at this point globally, from NATO side, from European side, we are working on that, yeah? For example, NATO, yeah? We are part of NATO Innovation Fund, NATO Defense Innovation Accelerator Fund, yeah? For example, in Lithuania, we have 6 testing centers for innovations. It's based on biotechnology, cybersecurity, ICT, and even for space technologies, yeah? It's also big emerging technology which can be used for good and for bad also. Yeah, so in the European Union we have new defense industry strategy, which is very good. We have to go more with European, more with our products. We have to work more closely between other European countries. So, and of course, each country, each member state, we have to work on our challenges also, because NATO is as strong as the weakest part of the NATO, I guess, yeah? So I can share, for example, in the previous panel discussion, a member of the parliament asked about demining, yeah? Latest example, yeah? 2 weeks ago, no, last week or 2 weeks ago, sorry, I don't remember well, we had NATO Innovation Challenge event. It was first time in Vilnius, and the topic was detection and neutralization of explosive contaminated areas. Yeah, it's quite a big issue still in the world. For example, in Croatia, still people are dying in these contaminated areas, and in Ukraine, I guess now it's like 30% of the area contaminated with mines. Yeah, and there are guesses that it will be 40% by the end of the year, yeah? And actually, it was new for me. I guess it's new for most of the people, yeah? Military, they're still using technology, which is basically the technology which was used 100 years ago, yeah? We have this person from the mining, from special forces, and he is just going with metal detector and searching for mines, yeah? So I'm very happy to announce that, yeah, we had 11 finalists in this NATO challenge event, and 5 from Lithuania. Actually, most of the decisions were based on drones and which payload you can bring to drone to detect these mines. Yeah. So, and the first place winner for the first place was from Lithuania, and they found the decision how to merge metal detecting with thermal detecting, and how to find accuracies I guess, yeah, it's still in the concept, but still in the experimental side of this, yeah, but we can guess that it will be something like 80% of accuracy, yeah? So, yeah, so it's very technological now, and we have to be prepared, and we have to work as NATO, work as European Union, and work as each state for this, and of course, national cooperation, bilateral cooperation. For example, our latest initiative in Lithuania, we signed MOU, our ministry, with Ministry of Defense, with Armed Forces, with Innovation Agency, and we established Miltech Academy. This is the body which brings academia, public sector, private sector under one roof, and we're trying to face all the challenges and find the solutions for these challenges. So, yeah, it's a bit about innovation, about technology, so I'll stop here. Let's keep for other questions, yeah.
Thank you, Rem.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here, but it's also a bit of a challenge coming as the last speaker, because I am in violent agreement with the three previous commentators. And so I'm struggling to say something original. And let me see if I can repackage some of the things that have already been said in a way that hopefully is original. I think my first observation is, remember 15 years ago when we were talking about emerging security challenges and it was all driven by terrorism and ISIS or Al-Qaeda and non-state actors that are going to disrupt the global order. And that era seems to have been left behind. I think the discussion so far points out that yes, we are concerned about emerging technologies, but we are primarily concerned about emerging technologies in hands of adversarial states. State threats, and whether states use non-state actors to promote their own agenda or not, but state threats are the main threats. And these state threats are the main threats because, as was pointed out, there are a group of states that have a revisionist mindset regarding the global order. And the best way I've heard the quartet of North Korea, Iran, Russia, and China be described recently is as the axis of upheaval. That they are there simply as spoilers to try to damage the West, to try to undermine the Western values because, as you pointed out, we play by the rules, we're kind of the good guys in the story. And they're trying to undermine that on a regular basis through their economic ties, through hybrid challenges, through direct military action. And then quickly the conversation then goes to, okay, we need to be capable of deterring the downsides and be able to respond and defend against and to deter further actions from upheavaling our societies. And this is the bridge to a point I want to elaborate a little bit, which connects with your initial comments regarding resilience. I think we need to underline, and I'm sure everyone in this room and online watching knows this, but resilience, economic resilience, societal resilience is a key and fundamental element in being able to deter. When we have conversations about deterrence, and I'm just reflecting also on the previous panel, we sometimes glance over the fact that yes, there is a lot that we need to do in the conventional or perhaps even in the nuclear terrain to be able to deter, but there is actually a much softer non-military side of deterrence which is as important, and that's resilience. That's societal resilience, economic resilience. And the way I phrase resilience and the challenge for Western societies is along 3 Ds. So if anything, take away from my comments, there are 3 Ds. The 3 Ds of resilience that we need to be prepared for. Well, the first D, and it's been mentioned before, is disruption. the way in which our critical infrastructure is vulnerable to disruption. Whether you look at the 700 megawatts of wind power which are being put in the Baltic by the Lithuanians, or the 160 gigawatt of wind power that's being rolled out in the North Sea, we have a common agenda to ensure that that remains secure and stable and not subject to sabotage. The same, of course, also holds with respect to internet access points, to ensure that our communications can still take place, that our digital society isn't disrupted through nefarious actions. And the Rear Admiral already talked about this in her opening keynote. And of course, cyber is almost the traditional element in this aspect, which is already receiving a lot of attention. But one element of disruption which hasn't been talked about so far is the weaponization of migration. And I don't need to tell that to a group here in Lithuania where you border Belarus, because we've seen the instances where this happens. And there is also the rise of a new sort of element of weaponization of migration should indeed Ukraine's energy infrastructure become compromised later this year, with new flows of migrants putting pressure on societies. And I hope Gert-Jan is right that the response is not going to be one of anti-migrant sentiment, but rather to say that this is a reason to double down in support of Ukraine. So that's disruption. The second D, it's also been mentioned, is disinformation. The distortion of facts, the sowing of discord, and the undermining of the functioning of democracy is here. And we need to prepare for that, and we need to adequately respond to it. Now, I heard a comment earlier today, I don't know who mentioned it, that education or that defense came at the expense of education. Actually, education plays a really, really important role here. I have 2 young kids in elementary school. They are being taught now how to distinguish between fake news and trustworthy news sources. I think that's tremendously important. I think education has a vital role to play to anesthetize our societies to disinformation. The third D is dependencies. And again, here in Lithuania, I do not need to point out how real that is, that economic coercion is a fact of economic life for Europeans, that China, Russia deploy this at will, that they manipulate their economic ties with European countries to get their way, that this leads to a push for more diversification, that we need to start thinking about the trade and the economic space instead of just-in-time models to just in case, that this comes with a cost, but the cost of reducing the volatility in our supply chains absolutely outweighs the enormous exponential costs we have to incur if we have to correct later on. For instance, if you would factor in the price hike that we've had to absorb as societies after the 2022 invasion of Ukraine by Russia in the gas system, and rolled that out and said instead of doing Nord Stream 2, perhaps we should have diversified our energy ties, I think that would outweigh it significantly. So supply chain resilience is back with a vengeance. Critical raw materials, 80% of rare earth elements comes from China, which we need in our high-end military equipment. There's a very strange situation that the United States mines its own rare earth ore and then ships it to China for processing, and then gets it returned, and then it enters the US military-industrial complex. I mean, wisely, the Americans are adjusting this, but where are our European dependencies and what are we doing about them? But it's not just about critical raw materials, it's also about fundamental industrial strength. Our ability to produce stuff and not to see our industries move away. And here I have to make a critical comment of our main allies, the United States. Trump hasn't been mentioned so far, but we don't know to what extent Trump could be a liability in terms of allowing Europe also to be resilient against some of the economic dependencies that we have vis-a-vis the United States. And all of this then packaged together leads you to a sort of the resilient bit of having effective deterrence. And then one more comment and then I'll shut up. The EU has a crucial role to play in all these areas. And yes, the EU has been mentioned, but NATO's deterrence depends on the EU being able to deliver on a number of these issues. It's the EU that develops industrial policy to protect European industries and to de-risk from unwanted economic dependencies. It's the EU that has a policy on resource security. It's the EU that we need to talk to ensure that we get nitrocelluloses from other sources than the Chinese, which is now a critical vulnerability when it comes to boosting up our industrial capacity for delivering ammunition. And it's the EU which is the critical partner of NATO when it comes to boosting military mobility, to supporting financial support for Ukraine, as well as giving hands and feet to the defense industry that we need to beef up in Europe. But the EU also needs to do its homework. It needs to engage much more proactively and constructively with NATO, and hopefully, after the 4th of July, when the United Kingdom has a new government, that the EU also engages constructively with the UK to develop a new chapter in security and defense relations, because that's going to be to the benefit of all and all NATO allies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We are short on time, but I would still like to involve the audience and ask the questions. So please prepare questions. Just quickly, one question to all of you. Since you all raised the issue of vulnerability of our democracies, that we find often ourselves on the back foot when we have to react and we have rules that we have to follow, right? And we also cannot, as certain autocracies or kleptocracies, just take the money from different spheres and invest into defense and military, right, as Russia can. But how would you see that our sort of being responsive to the problems and to the unknown is also a benefit for us? Anyone? Margarita, maybe you?
I'll start and then probably the colleagues will develop. I think that you are touching upon a very, very important problem that we are facing, the nature of democracies. We are very open, therefore we are very vulnerable, and lots of resilience measures requires at some point being able to close down against the external interferences. But if we are becoming less open, we're becoming less democracies. And what we're facing at the moment in the world is lowering standards of the democracies. There are fewer democracies today, for instance, as it was in 2016, a lot fewer, but also the standards of democracies are degrading even in the very old and mature democracies. And the reasons are multiple. Economic problems is one, social media, internet as an enabler is two, tribalism and identities is three. But one of the major reasons why democracy standards are falling is the vicious circle that we're facing. When democracies to defend ourselves, we are becoming more closed. And when democracies become start acting as autocracies, they reduce the level of trust in democracies. And therefore, the standards of democracies are falling. So what I see at the moment, and that makes me anxious, not the external turbulences, yes, they do make me anxious, but our ability to kill ourselves, populism, radicalism, loss of trust in democracies. And I think that this is very important while trying to construct foreign and security policy strategies, both internal and external, not to lose our main pillars as democracies, because we are open. The free speech, freedom of association, freedom of expression, these are at the core. So I admire, the standards that we have to be more proactive and more inventive. But in this path, I think it is very important to stay true to our main core values.
Sure. Well, very quickly, I think democracies have it's two-way street. And of course, everyone is in favor of democracies, and we will remain democracies. But to some extent, I think sometimes governments need to exert an active role implementing constitutional task of educating people. Secondly, solving problems here and now instead of kicking the can down the road. Thanks.
Just small remark. So as you mentioned in your question, that in countries like Russia, there's direct order to contribute, but I guess we can say that when it's voluntary, not mandatory, in the long term, it always wins. I have a good example. Last year, we prepared the roadmap for defense and security industry, and all the associations, social partners were involved, and colleagues from not defense sectors, from all the other sectors, they're ready to contribute. They're just asking how we can contribute to our defense. We have to work with logistics. Okay, we will do this. We have to build fences. We will do this. So when it's voluntary, so in democratic states we have this voluntarity, and it's always stronger than mandatory orders in other countries.
Very quickly, at the Klingendahl Institute, we do regular public opinion survey amongst Dutch respondents, and we ask them questions about, for instance, how do they view Russia, how do they view Russia sanctions, how do they look at different elements of international relations. And one of the things that's very striking is that the group of respondents that are sort of pro-Putin, pro-Kremlin, or anti-Ukraine, if you will, are also those that are you're pro-Putin, and you're also anti-EU, and you're anti-vax, and you're anti-the West, and so it's more almost a civilizational outlook, which we're seeing at least in our data, which is driving sort of support for autocratic alternatives. And I think we need to be realistic about that. So these are people who are generally really strongly anti-establishment, that just think that society should be ordered in a completely different way. And it's not just that they support autocracy, it's just they have a completely different worldview. At the same time, we're slightly comforted in the results that we see that this is a relatively small group, right? And that there is a lot of space of people that simply don't know or are able to be educated. And I would also say that democracies are not just what people say. Democracies are also measured by the strength of their institutions and how institutions are able to respond to certain developments. So the fact that you have growing support for, say, radical right-wing parties across a number of European countries doesn't necessarily translate into policies that have to be deeply undesirable or uncomfortable or undermining of our deterrence.
So, take the question now.
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay, Edvardas Berūnas, Lithuania ambassador, foreign ministry. So with my previous engagements as a Lithuania's ambassador to hybrid threat, I was always been passionate with this terminology, hybrid threat. Sort of, there is Article 5 and there is hybrid threats. But now as we see what is happening in our region, especially what Mindaugas, my foreign minister colleague, was mentioning, sabotages and arsoning and fires and killing and injuring politicians. So we are entering actually in the new sort of phase where we cannot anymore describe Article 5 and non-Article 5. There is something in between. Actually, even our Prime Minister was recently mentioning that what now Russia is doing, short of invading Lithuania, there is already kinetic activities. So how you would reflect on this? My second point is what you were, all of you were speaking about this, how to counter this and how to react to the threats. And there is what, from my point of view, one of the key issues which is lacking is the political will. In many countries, Lithuania, we have understanding of Russia, what Russia is doing, we have knowledge, but we also have political will to react. But there are many countries which, again, I'm not blaming them, they are far from Russia, where there is emerging understanding, but there is a lack of political will. And this is what now we see this discrepancy in EU-NATO policies. So how we can achieve this, how we can bridge this gap between political, how we can achieve that the political will be more or less similar in many EU-NATO countries. Thank you. Two small questions.
Let me start. I think two excellent questions, Ambassador. One, on the first one regarding kinetic and non-kinetic as an element of hybrid threats, I think this exactly also aligns with the broader point I was making about upheaval, that these are countries, these are actors that are actively, deliberately trying to create disruptions, to create anxiety, which falls short of war, but are more than simple annoyances. And this, to me, simply underlines the need for structural approaches to building resilience, and particularly in perhaps the country I come from, to create awareness that this can happen, right? And that might sound a bit flippant, but in the Netherlands, when Bob Bauer of the NATO military staff went on television and said people should prepare and have batteries in their home and fresh water because something might happen, people responded by kind of laughing it off and saying, like, what is this? And then people afterwards, because there were more generals and military leaders kind of emphasizing that message, I think this is part of the broader societal education that we particularly need in Western Europe without creating a sense that war is pending. But I think your point is absolutely right. This is something that's happening which we need to take very seriously, and it all comes down to how we respond as societies. The second question eludes me now at the moment, so I'm going to pass it on to my colleague and then maybe get back to you.
Anyone else wants to say?
Elaborate on the gap between the decision makers and societies in Europe and even in the wider region. Okay, we can talk about the threats, the potential danger, and that is very important to discuss things, to share the knowledge, to share the information. But at the end of the day, I think that it is very important as well not to have an illusion that we will be on the same boat, because it's the threat, the immediacy of the threat that changes the perception. For instance, and I can give you a very good example. In general, in Europe, but also in the US, there is a lack, the shrinking will of the young people to go to the armed forces, to join the armed forces. It's all over. And, well, you can explain this basing on a lot of factors, changing values, changing styles of life, anything. But look at the example of Sweden. For a long time, they've been facing this problem. However, when they joined the NATO, the numbers of the volunteers going to serve in armed forces increased to a very, very high extent. What is this? It's an understanding of threat, immediacy of the threat. So I think that we will be different. It is very important that there is an understanding on certain things, but I wouldn't make a big problem from the differences that exist.
And unfortunately, as a moderator, I have to have the very unpleasant task of ending this very interesting discussion, because our guests still have another program. So I want to thank the panel. Once again, I want to thank the embassy for our long-standing partnership. I also want to thank Linkendal for being always with us and promoting this dialogue. I think what this panel showed, and previous, of course, as well, is that one of the ways to move forward is to exchange the ideas. So thank you again to the embassy for the opportunity to do that. And join me in thanking the panel and concluding the conference. Thank you.